when he appeared first on news, and then it became viral. So yeah.
Oh, really cute. Okay,
And that's good.
Yeah,
that's good that we. Sorry, that's good that we sent you stamps, because for one of our friends in Canada, we sent a piece of, I don't know, was it a piece of tank or a piece of a rocket shell, and the Canadian Post destroyed the package. So he didn't get his New Year package in Toronto. So it's good that we send you stamps and some more like casual stuff to US. We don't send any more like armored stuff, because we are helping our soldiers. We're buying them lots of different like scopes and like everything you can buy in non-military supplies, like some gear, some special binoculars and all that stuff. And they always give us like a thank you with some a box from the Javelin, like the used case from the rocket, or some kind of Russian documents, some not some important documents, but some kind of Russian that they find. So they always send some stuff, and sometimes we send it to our clients to US or Canada, just to give them some souvenirs. And for one client, there was some part of the shell or what was it, and it was not let through by the Canadian Post, sadly. Yeah, so that's the story.
Oh, well, very good. Well, Susan is going to be our moderator today, and I haven't. I'm just chit-chatting, waiting for Susan to say, "Go get them."
Okay, well, since Sal has said, let's go get them, I'm going to say, go get them. We are recording this today to be able to distribute the recording to those who are very interested in what's going on and actually join at this time. So my name is Susan Kane. I am a volunteer for Ukraine Flags for Solidarity, among a few other things that I do in life. And for those who may be kind of new to these calls, and welcome, Roberta. Yvonne is the CEO of Euristiq that works with Sal's company, Heart Zones. And welcome, everybody. So I did send Yvonne some questions in advance that are kind of related to the war and such. But before we dig into that, in the little pre-discussion of this call, Fred and I were talking about how the first things Americans talk about is the weather. And actually, I was thinking about the phrase because we have a beautiful day here in Chicago, and Chicago winters are pretty nasty and everything, but it's a beautiful day here, which reminded me of the phrase that hope springs eternal. And what that means is that there's confidence that what we expect will happen, and we can wait for it with peace and joy. Such hope outweighs and overwhelms current circumstances, whatever they may be. And so I wanted to just start out with the question to our friends from Ukraine, and Maria, you can answer this as well. Does hope spring eternal in Ukraine, or is just kind of with what the war and everything, is that just overwhelm everything?
Maria, please start.
For sure, spring does bring some hope. I would say much hope, because the weather is nice, it's sunny, and it's much warmer than in winter. It's almost summer-like here in Ukraine, in Lviv, and our spirits are lifted, of course. We've got lots of vitamin D. Yeah, compared to winter when we had power outages, and it was dark most of the time. So we had the schedule when we had light, electricity, and no electricity, and we had to like juggle between those times and use some power banks, I guess, just to access, I don't know, like charge laptops or our phones. So it was pretty depressing. And with the spring came improvement in all of that. We don't have power outages anymore. Hopefully we won't have them again. And we just hope that the war will end in our favor soonish, I guess. And yeah, so I think we are doing much better than in winter. What about you, Ivan? Maybe you will add more.
Yeah, I think it was very strange feeling when World Health Organization declared that COVID is over. It was like a few weeks ago. And I remember I sent this, there was a news that the World Health Organization officially declares pandemic is over. And I send this to the team chat and say, hey, in some moment of time, we will have such news about war, right? So it's not going to be forever. And COVID was stressful in many ways. And it was feeling like it's the end of the world. And, you know, some people, and there were lots of information and emotional stress. And we have something similar right now with war. So you have something happening that, you know, you cannot avoid, you cannot mitigate, you cannot hide from there, and you have no idea when it's going to end, right? So, but with this news, with pandemic is over, it kind of lifted my mood as well, because I realized that we will have this moment in the future, right, when we have war is over, and hopefully with our complete victory and returning of all our territories and people from the, you know, different regions where they were moved from Ukraine. So it's it might be hard and dark at some moments, but it's very, very reassuring. We are getting lots of support from the Western world, and it's not just Western world. I mean, like most of the country, like Australia, Japan. I think it can also be said Western world, like Western values world. But yeah, and it's reassuring that we're gonna win this war. And yeah, I guess we can continue with other questions, because there are more like war-related questions in the list. So
yeah. Well, thank you for that, your responses to that question that I sprung upon you. So moving on then, the start of the counterattack has been imminent for weeks. Can you discuss the reasons for the delay and kind of what the expectations are for the counterattack?
So yeah, it's been a lot of discussion about that everywhere, and it's obvious that our army is getting ready for that, and the arms are coming, and those who have friends or families in the army, they can also confirm, you know, in a private conversation, that there is a lot of preparation. I think it's important that we understand that this offensive might not be our last offensive, so it's definitely a big one, and everyone expects some good results, maybe returning some important territories or making important gains. But it's probably not the end of Russian army. It's not the collapse of Russian army in the very near future. So it's obvious that the goal is to use this momentum to cause the maximum effect, maximum damage on them. And that's why you know, our command is being very careful. And there are also a lot of information wars happening right now. You might heard about recent events in Russian Belgorod. There was like you know, from Ukrainian side, Russian volunteers that are fighting in Ukraine for Ukraine. They entered the Russian territory. They started grabbing Russian villages. So there is a lot of this kind of non-standard approaches that our command is using, because we cannot win with Russia head to head. They simply bigger. They had more people. So we are kind of searching for opportunities to be more creative and to figure out how to give them more damage with less resources that we can apply. And that's why it's kind of, I'm sure this counteroffensive, there will be a lot of like probing operations in different sides of the front line before we see where is the biggest like return on investment we can hit in this. It's not going to be like bold head-to-head fight like Russia is doing. What they did in Bakhmut, it was just, they just hit the wall with their heads, and they kill lots of their soldiers in this offensive. So that's why it's kind of taking time. But I think people here mostly understand that it's there is no rush, because we don't have that many resources to fail and then try again. If we fail this right now, there might be no second chance. And it's also important for the Western allies to see the progress of their, they send us weapons and they send us support and money, and they want to see the progress. If we don't show any progress, it might change and support my decline. So it's important to make this counteroffensive, as productive as we can. So yeah, and there was also pretty long winter. It was not cold winter, but it was like muddy and long till April or something, and you cannot move heavy equipment when there is the ground is wet and mud and so on. So that was also part of the reason, I believe, as well.
Okay. I'm going to jump around from the order in which I sent you the questions, Ivan, just because you talked about the movement of troops into Russia, and previously all the fighting had been happening in Ukraine. And there was and this actually was Fred's question, so you can jump in, Fred. But what we had heard in the news here is that potentially it was Russian troops that have been making movement against, Russian people against, the Russian troops or such. So a little unclear, at least to me, whether the attack in Russia is coming from Ukraine versus some divergent people in Russia.
So it was Russian people entering Russia from Ukrainian territory. So there are a lot of Russians fighting in Ukrainian armies. There are people that left, they were fleeing Putin and his regime. They were like political dissidents and military dissidents or whatever, like opposition. So there are lots of groups of Russian citizens that don't actually live in Russia because they're oppressed there, and they live in different countries. They live in Czech Republic, they live in Ukraine, in Poland, and many of them, when war happens with Russia, they join Ukrainian, like international soldiers that we have from all around the world that fighting in our army. There are also lots of Russian that fighting in our army with Russian passports, and they are united in so-called Russian Legion, or there is some other name, I don't remember. So there are like hundreds of Russian citizens that fighting for Ukraine in this war because they're fighting Putin regime. And they entered Russian territory from Ukraine, and they kind of, with liberation claims and so on. But it's obvious that they get some support from the Ukrainian because they get some equipment, they get some guns, they get some vehicles. So it's not like they just reappear in the middle of the Russia. They appear from Ukrainian part of the border. Officially, Ukraine says, we don't have nothing to do with them because that's Russian citizens fighting Russia, and we support peace in the region, etc. So we just mirroring their bullshit that they throw at us during the Donbass and Crimea occupation. So our command just kind of making fun of them and using the same messages, and it's very hard for them to beat that messages because they use the same narrative for like 8 years when they entered Donbass and Crimea in 2014. They pretty much said, no, it's not us, there are some people fighting for freedom, etc., etc. But everyone knew it was Russian, but they used this. So that's what it is, what is happening. And the reason behind this attack Russia pretty much don't have any troops on their border right now. They put everyone in Crimea, in Donbass, and I understand our command tries to exploit these holes. And of course, we're not going to get to Moscow, but we will. It shows very bad precedent for Putin that he cannot control his territory, and people from the towns and villages that are close to Ukrainian border, I mean Russian citizens, they are scared, they are fleeing the country, they are fleeing to Moscow, they are making lots of like noise, and that's what we actually want. We want them to to be scared. We want them to understand that their government cannot protect them. So that's kind of the reason that that's kind of long-term game to put Putin down, because Russian people will not mobilize around democratic values, but they might mobilize around fear, and that's this kind of creative ideas that we are using as part of this long-term strategy to destroy Putin regime. Because even if we capture all territories back, but if Putin is still in the chair, it's not going to give us a lot of security. They can, build up, they can mobilize more people. So it's important that our definition of the victory is not just returning the land, it's also destroying their, Putin mafia regime that controls the country. And I know there are lots of efforts that Ukraine is doing with supporting minorities within Russia. There are, Russia is a very big country. There are lots of different nations. There are lots of different languages and religions, and of course, it were all oppressed by central Moscow government. But Ukraine is now kind of playing a role when it tries to help these small nations with some intel, with some other stuff, if they want to raise some, protests, or they want to raise some independent rallies or whatever. So it's kind of much bigger game that we are playing, and that's what many people on the West, they don't fully understand. But the idea behind that is it's not enough just to regain territory. We need to destroy the regime, because it's a still huge country. They still have lots of potential. They have economy, they have many people, and if they don't turn down the government, it's just a matter of time when they're gonna get back. And that's why our game is a bit more like we're playing 3D chess here in different manner. And yeah.
That was very helpful. Definitely some insights there that were kind of like new ahas to me. Fred, did that answer your question, or do you have some follow-up related questions?
The follow-up is, are there Ukrainian groups that have organized that are fighting that are not under the control of the military? I mean, does the military actually allow people to fight Russia when they're not part of the military? Can citizens go out and fight the Russians on their own?
So we had, we have a professional army, and we have, there are three types of, I mean, there are more, but I mean, in general, there is people that serve in the army, that's right now in the army. There are contract army. There are some also like professional army, but they came like voluntarily. They're contractors. They voluntarily work there. And there is a new unit that's called territorial defense. And territorial defense was formed maybe like 6 months before the war started. So it was a big reform in Ukraine. So basically, what's territorial defense? Any man or woman can join local territorial forces. So you pretty much just come in, they write down your passport data on some kind of list, and they give you a gun, or they ask you if you have any knowledge, if you have any skills, they can give you a bigger gun. So that's what you saw in the news when the war started. The first few days, there were like these lines of people in Kiev receiving AK-47 to defend the country. So that was like territorial defense people. And when you join this territorial defense, you kind of become part of the military. It's so you will be then sent like to some more extended training, and then you will be sent on some missions if needed. So it's not like some special forces, but they are used in the army. So you cannot just go and, you know, and shoot on the front line, but you can easily join either if you have some prior training, you can sign a contract with army and become like army contractor, or if you voluntarily want to join, you just join this territorial defense units, and you know, you will have some training and you will be fighting. So that's how it's working.
Thank you.
Thank you. If we could go back then to kind of the anticipated counter-offensive, and you alluded to that. Well, you mentioned the important fact that it's not that it's the expectation is the counteroffensive happens and then the war is over, that there will be, you know, continued efforts to kind of win the war. But what do you think will define success for this, you know, kind of next attack? Is it reclaiming territories? How does
so returning to what I mentioned about our ultimate goal is to return our territories and destroy the Russian regime, right? And there are different definitions what does it mean, but let's start with Putin no longer president. That's already going to be a big change in Russia, because there are lots of powerful groups that, you know, waiting, mostly they arming up. So right now what we see in Russia, there are you know, they have their type of government. They have these rich people, oligarchs, that control different industries. So there is people controlling gas, there are people controlling oil, there are people controlling some agriculture, and there are pretty much you know, maybe like 100 rich people or families that control 99% of all the wealth, or something like that. And these people normally have some big business behind them, like Gazprom or some kind of other, you know, like oil business. And what we see right now, that this business is starting organizing private military companies. So there is Gazprom, private military company. There is Lukoil, which is you know, the biggest gas station in Russia. They're having their private military company. So they are kind of preparing, and they all say, yeah, we're preparing these military companies to fight in Ukraine, but they are not sending people to fight in Ukraine. They are preparing, you know, when you know, it's getting worse, they will start eating each other. And whoever has army, whoever has at least 1,000 people with guns, has a huge advantage. You might have $5 billion, but if you don't have people with guns, you know, it's just nothing. So they're now building this, they kind of preparing for the world, for the life in Russia after Putin. And it's very probable that there will be some tension between these groups of people fighting for power, and eventually someone will be on top of that, and he will be, you know, forming the government, negotiating with West to put down sanctions, agreeing to some reparations to Ukraine, and all of that stuff. And so our victory plan is returning territories and destroying Russian government, but I would say it's more important to destroy their government, because it might be hard to return all territory on the battlefield. But if let's say Putin disappears, it will be much easier for us to return territories, because they will start fighting. They will start this kind of rat race within Russia, and it will be much easier for us to return the territory. So I would say what I believe, based on what I heard from different people, the idea of this counteroffensive is not as much about gaining all the territory or big part of territory, but making as much you know, like political, emotional, psychological lose to Putin and to Russia. You know, getting in their heads that Putin is not God, he's not mighty, he's losing, he cannot protect you, he cannot protect anyone. So I think this counteroffensive will go along with a lot of this information wars, propaganda, and other stuff, because the long term for us is more important to undermine them from inside, rather than just physically go and grab all the land on the very first offensive. So yeah, there probably will be some territories back, but the most important will be maybe encircling some important units of Russia and maybe having them as prisoners of war, or doing some humiliating stuff, right? Like destroying Black Fleet completely, or using some other stuff, So like I think this psychologically humiliating stuff are more important for us, because they making it closer for Putin to lose his face in the country and eventually, either run away or he will be killed or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, very good. President Zelensky recently visited Rome, Berlin, Paris, and London, receiving significant commitments for needed equipment. However, that delivery of that equipment and the training that needs to come with it is likely months out. Couple questions related to that. First of all, though, what was the reaction of the people of Ukraine to the president's trip?
No, he's traveling more this year, and after that he went to was it Saudi Arabia? There was an Arab League gathering, and then he went to Hiroshima to G7. So he's doing a lot of traveling, and I think it's normal that big part of our war is diplomatic and support from the partners. So yeah, it's considered very positive. And what's more important, that we see reassurance from all the mighty countries that they are supporting us. They continue supporting us. Germany, seriously stepped in. So Germany gave us like 2 billion euros last year of help. This year, for just the first 5 months, they gave us 3.5, and they're giving us a lot of modern equipment. So Germany, like they took some time to get speed, and it's very important for us to see, because Germany is the biggest economy in Europe, and it was, Europe was always dependent on Russian resources, energy resources. Now they are independent of that. They finally figure out how to, find out alternative sources, and they're supporting more and more. And this is very, very important, because, if it's just going to be US, it's always a risk. But now we have Britain is giving a lot of stuff, Germany is giving a lot of stuff, and US is like very afraid of give us some modern stuff. But Germany just give us their latest air defense. That's like just they don't even have it in their army, and this is just amazing, because we need this air defense. So that's very reassuring that we have not just US but other big and powerful countries that help us, and they kind of make it as a message to Putin as well, that we are not stopping. So we are not gonna slow down or forget about this conflict or whatever.
At the same time, though, you alluded earlier about the fact that there needs to be some progress demonstrated to the partners and the countries that are supporting you. And we've heard things about it being, like in the US here, that there's concern about, like, Biden, if you're not showing progress, will he continue, or the US continue support, that maybe the time frame needs to be 12 to 18 months to get out of kind of the war, have the end, be in sight. Comments on that, the time frame?
I totally agree with that. So US is still the biggest power in the world, and even despite all the criticism from some European governments that, hey, US, they have a lot of internal debate, Democrats, Republicans, but US still the biggest economy, US still the strongest army in the world, and it's way stronger than, like the second army or so. So it's still very critical what US thinks about this. And US probably the only country in the world that has influence on other countries if they need it, to persuade Europeans to participate, or some kind of Japan or South Korea or Israel. So, I mean, that's very, very important. And I totally agree with you that next year election in US is something that we discuss a lot in our media as, we have to finish this by this election. We have to figure out the way that give them the major blow this year, and maybe finalize stuff next year, till your election, because if it's turned out to be, like a very slow conflict, that's actually what Putin wants. He wants to over suffer the other countries. So he says, okay, you give them equipment, but we can suffer 1 year, we can suffer 2 years, and eventually you will get tired, or you will have election and something will change in your country, and we will wait for a few years, and then we will get back on track. So that's their strategy. But I think what you said about 12-18 months is correct, and that's what we understand as well. Is important that we need to give something really major should happen in this timeline. Maybe not like complete finalization of everything and starting the building, but it should be like very, very visible that, like Germany in the late 44, right? It was already visible that they are losing. So they're still kind of trying for a few more months or half a year, but they were losing. So that's what we need to achieve in the next 12 to 18 years. So, 12 to 18 months. And yeah, that's the strategy. And that's why you hear a lot of discussion about Crimea grabbing, not Donbass area, because we understand if we grab Donbass, Putin can always explain this like, it was not part of Russia, we don't care, we just, it might not damage his reputation that much. But if we took Crimea from him, just gonna destroy him, because he built like all of his propaganda around Crimea as a central part of Russian Black Sea Fleet. So that's why our idea is not just to grab territories, to give them the maximum blow of kind of reputation and mentality. And that's why I think Crimea is definitely going to be a target and to get it back. Because if we take Crimea, the rest will just fall down as a house of cards. So
yeah. So May 9th was Victory Day, an important national holiday in Russia. Were you surprised that there wasn't any kind of major attack on Kiev, for example? Or, as I understand it in Russia, it was in Moscow, the typical parade and such was much more low key than in years past. Was there something that you expected might have happened given the significance of the?
It's very strange. Last year we were afraid about May 9th because we were afraid that Russia would, they were still attacking last year, and we were afraid that they would use nukes or something because their initial plan didn't work out. This year, we expected Ukraine to attack Moscow, and we were like, many people were disappointed because they were expecting drones falling on. There were a couple of drones falling in Kremlin few days before May 9th, and they were so scared about that they grabbed lots of air defense in Moscow. So it was like 1 year passed, and we were just, last year we were expecting strikes on Kiev. This year we were disappointed that we didn't damage Moscow much. There are still explosions. It's covered here on news. Probably it's not getting in your news, but in Moscow every day something burns, and especially some plants, factories, anything related to the military complex. So every day there is something burning in Russia, and that's pretty much drone technologies that we improve day by day, and they cannot do anything with that. So they have these heavy bombs, they have these big bombs that they can shoot and destroy the whole like building complex, but we have a lot of smaller stuff that are precise. And I just read today that there was another drone attack on Russian Black Ship in Black Sea, Black Sea ship in the Black Sea with Ukrainian drone. Yeah, it changed. We try to put the war on their territory as much as we can, and I think that's important part in this conflict, in this war.
Mm-hmm. Okay, very interesting. Very interesting. Why don't we start opening it up to questions from the group? Sal, I know you put something into the chat. Do you want to go ahead and raise that question, please? And you're on mute. Sal, you're on mute.
I'm sorry. So this is a magazine called The Atlantic in America. I don't know if you all are familiar with Ukraine with this magazine. And it has this month's issue, and it says, the headline is "The Choices Between Fear and Democracy." And freedom, I'm sorry. And so the question was about it seems to us, and thank you, Fred, for the question, the definition of victory has changed. And to my reading, I have Princess's article. Go ahead.
Well, it's just you wrote there. They said that there were 3 definitions of victory.
And I put that question in the chat box, which is on your lower right-hand corner. Is that because of the perception of the war, or why victory is expanded? And my other question was, when the draft happened in Russia, there were supposedly in our news 200,000 young Russians who escaped or left Russia. Are they part of the resistance, or are they just? We were told they're mostly tech workers.
Yeah, no, they fled. They fled. They're not so many of them. So if you, it's funny enough, if you open GDP of Georgia or Armenia or other small Russian neighbor, their GDP just skyrocketing, because there are lots of rich Russians with money, or like some engineers, good paid people, software engineers can work anywhere in the world with their laptop. And they just brought this money, they just brought their saving, they buying apartments, they buying houses in this kind of small country. So Georgia or Armenia, just a couple of million people country. So if you have 10,000 rich people with money buying properties, your GDP starts growing by some few percentages. So yeah, they are fleeing Russia. And that's also part of the long-term defeat of Russia to, that was US was doing with Soviet Union, take away the smartest people from their country, from their economy. And yeah, a lot of Russians leaving country to European Union, to other places. They're not that welcome in many places, but still, there are Asian countries that accepting them. In Turkey is very, Turkey doesn't take a side openly, so there are. That's why I'm not considering going to vacation or so on to Turkey. There are lots of Russians, and they will stay there for many years. So it's not something I want to see on my vacation in the future. So yeah, Turkey. There are lots of Russians in Turkey, and yeah. So I hope I answer about the migrating people. And there are also questions about 3 definitions of the victory, and that's pretty much what I said. It's not enough just to get the land. It's important to get the security, and the best security for us is to destroy Putin, right? That's the best security. So you see here, like, victory means that Ukrainians are safe from Russian violence. It's, if Putin is at power, doesn't matter what he signs. It just doesn't matter anything, because he will break this agreement next day if he sees the opportunity. So for us, it's in a diplomatic language, it's called Ukrainians safe from Russian violence. In a non-diplomatic, it means take away the Putin and his government. That's the only, because if we get security, and I just read that France is open to giving us security guarantees, and some other countries, but we understand what's the big worries. And all these countries, they might give us security today, but tomorrow their government changes, they change their plans, some other economic crisis here, they have their priorities. Putin will throw immigrants in their countries to distract them from the insides, and they will not be guaranteeing us any securities. And that's by the way why Baltic countries are so supportive, and I mean on the diplomatic field for Ukraine, because they are very close to Russia and they're very small. Like the Baltic countries might be like 50, 100 kilometers or miles wide. So they understand, they had this relief that they're part of NATO, but when they saw what Russians do in occupation, how they murder, how they rape, how they kill civilians, they understand if Russia occupied Baltics, and if, let's say, NATO starts gathering troops and enter, in 2 months, like half of the Baltics will be dead and another half will be somewhere in Siberia. So that's why they also, one of the biggest voices for Ukraine that this victory is not just about regaining territory, but, removing the teeth from this Russian bear and, like destroying their government. Because what's UN Security Council, they just gather, they just talk. Russia says there are biolabs in Ukraine. Everyone is concerned. Russia said Ukraine invented COVID. Everyone just nod their head. Like this diplomatic is good, but it's working on the long term. But if someone just invades you and kills you and tortures you, it's happening here and now, and you don't have months to respond and gather round tables and all the brains, around this kind of UN Security Councils. So that's why it's important that we understand, like diplomatically, we need to talk about some security, guarantees from other countries. But practically, we understand if we break their spine, our kids and our grandkids will be safe. If we don't break their spine, the risk of big war is very high. That's as simple as that. And we were trying to give this message to the West, but it's very hard to understand to some people. So we're like moving it slowly. We started with the message that we need to regain the territories, and now everyone starts understanding that it's it's not possible with the security guarantees until Russia keeps their government. So that's just the gradual diplomatic process that we are doing as well in this matter.
Ivan or Maria, is there like a number two? All the focus is on Putin, but there has to be like, we have a vice president, Kamala Harris, who has power. Other people who have power that we don't recognize, or is it just Putin?
It's a dictatorship. It's a god type of cult. Everything on the news. He always brings the positive news. If something is bad, there is always some governor that did this bad thing, or there is some minister that did. Like Putin never did anything bad. He never did bad decisions. He's like always a perfect guy. And everything that's going wrong, every problem that people have, Putin will appear. Like, let's say there are some miners not getting their salaries or something like that. They will, start protesting. And then Putin will come and say, hey, there was this bad minister that made bad decision. I'm going to fire him. And hey, Putin is the best guy in the world. So that's like all about, if you read about fascism, that's actually one of the aspects is that you have how it's called in English, one person cult, right? That's the God cult of the leader. If you remove the leader, it's everything start like there is no number two. That's why they're arming up, because there will the number two will define in a fight within the Russia, and that's why West is so scared with all the Russia collapse and nukes all around the country, because it's very hard to manage this random fights that will start within Russia and who's going to be on the top, and it's much easier to mitigate the risk when the country is more or less managed by some hierarchy. So you kind of get in contact with the number two or number three, and you prepare the replacement, and you find a good relationship. But if you have number two is missing, there's going to be a war, and who knows what's happened. That's harder to predict. So that's why there is a lot of not resistance, but a lot of carefulness from the Western government how to manage this mess.
Thank you. Fred has a question. Okay.
Fred always has a question, and this is for Maria. So Can you tell us what things are positive in Ukraine now? What things are people looking forward to? What things are people going, wow, this is cool, we can do this now? Can you give us some good news from Ukraine, please?
Good news from Ukraine. Actually, everyone just tries to enjoy their lives as much as possible. So we cannot go on vacations with our husbands abroad, for example, but we can have like, I don't know, picnic in the park, for instance. So we just try to have simple pleasures, enjoy the weather. If we're just like talking about ordinary people and our lives. I don't know, just every time I open the news, there are some bad news, and they all just bring us down. So if we read news that when the West helps us and we are given weapons and etc., it lifts our spirits, and we feel the support of the Western world and just of the world in general, and it certainly helps. So those are positive news for us. There are some like local news when something is fixed or happens, I don't know, like I'm trying to think of some example, but I cannot at the moment. But there are some minor changes. For instance, we had our streets renamed, streets that were named after some Russian people, and they were like that for ages. And we had them, most of them, or if not all of them, renamed. And it's a small thing, but it certainly shows that Ukrainians are severing ties with Russia, and I don't know, those are happy news for us, for me, for instance.
Well, you answered the question very well, because everything you answered was related to the war. It seems like that's true in your life. Everything is related to the war in some way. So thank you.
Yeah, I can add that we have like 40 million people country, and we have more than 1 million people in army right now. So it's 1 in 40 people. So if you know 40 people, someone of them is in army, and it's not just young men. They're like from 18 to 60 years old. So you have a family member in army, you have someone from school in army, you have someone from university in army, you have someone that already died in the war, you have someone that's injured. So like it just, everyone has someone, and it's integral part of our life. You cannot, it's not like some minor 0.1% of people or something like that. That's a big percentage of people in army. And there are lots of people that not in army, but they're in critical infrastructure, the electricity workers. There are many of them died during the shelling of our power infrastructure. The railway workers, many of them died because they were shooting like some railway warehouses and etc. And there are firefighters. There are lots of doctors and medical personnel that also serve, maybe not serve, but also close to the front line. There are lots of hospitals in the areas close to the front line. So it is part of our life. For some people it's more tragic because they already lost someone close. Some people it's not that tragic because maybe they haven't lost anyone yet. And I'm not in the army, but I understand I might be in the army next month. So a lot of people, like in my office, we are going shooting. When we have a team building, before we would go kayaking on the lake. Now we go shoot because you need to know how to shoot. So we go shooting in a place because this is the skill that might need. We would have some master class in our office. We still have master class how to make Easter eggs and all that stuff, but now we also have master class how to make the first aid help, how to use a tourniquet, how to do all that stuff. That's part of the life, right? And I would like to add on a positive thing. Maria mentioned that we're renaming streets. We moved our Easter today, Ukrainian church, and also, sorry, not Easter, but Christmas is December 25 finally. So it's no longer January 7 as it was in Orthodox style. It's going to be December 25 as the rest of the world. And we, again, war related. We learned to shoot the most advanced Russian rockets, Kinzhal, luckily with US air defense Patriot. So we shoot 7 of them already. And this is the most advanced hypersonic rockets they had. And we shoot 7 of them. They have like 55 of them. We already shoot 7 of them. And they are, they can carry nuclear weapons. So it's tactical nuclear, how it's called, rockets. And we shoot, like they were shooting 7 of them on Kiev, and 100% we intercepted, which was not in the official Patriot air defense kind of description. It was not mentioned that it can do that, but obviously it can do, and our military is doing that. And you remember there were lots of talking when we were requesting this air defense, and there were lots of experts saying, no, they cannot master that. They need like a year to master that. They need like six months to master that. And we had like 2 months training or so, and we're shooting the most advanced Russian rockets. So, I mean, that's a positive thing that Ukraine is becoming, subjective on a global field. People know about us. I remember first time I came to US, it was Boston in 2012 or so, or 14. And I remember I mentioned I'm from Ukraine, and people were asking me, is this part of Russia, or where is it? So now it's more, Ukraine is more, we are regaining our presence in the global world. People recognize our flags. People recognize our culture. There is certain food that's Ukrainian. There is certain music that's Ukrainian. And a lot of that was, Russia would use, as they're colonizing this big part of the world, they would use it as their, because, they would say, they were controlling the Soviet Union, they would claim that all the history from these countries on the Soviet Union is their history. And now we are kind of regaining a lot of this information. So everyone knows that borscht is Ukrainian, not Russian. And, Carol of the Bells is Ukrainian, it's not Russian. And they just try to steal everything that they can. So that's also very, very positive. Again, it's kind of war-related, but it's a long-term strategic for the nation and for the country. We have many Ukrainians living abroad in US and Canada that moved many years ago. There were several ways of immigration, but many of them feel Ukrainian these days as well, and they support and they send different help. So that's very important.
We are just about out of time, but maybe one relatively quick answer to Sal's last question, because this was on my original list of questions and I didn't raise it as well. But Sal says, Bakhmut is daily in our news. Can you explain why the military has focused at such high cost, given that Russia basically has control over it? Ukraine has made some progress surrounding areas, but again, at very high cost and lots of death. It's, not strategically important to the overall war from kind of what I read, yet, the fighting continues there. Why is it important to Ukraine? And that'll be our last question.
I think I think the biggest reason why, the biggest importance of that is that we had Russians on the hook to capture that. There were a lot of, so that's the biggest city they captured since, I guess, last year. And it's the town that 80,000 people is 57th town in Ukraine by the size. So you can understand what level of victory it is for them. But what's for us, there were a lot of fighting, and again, our military and our PsyOps invested a lot in making fun of Russia when they were fighting for this city. You cannot have it in a week, you cannot have it in a month. They actually spent more than half a year to capture that, and they get them on this situation when they cannot abandon that, because we were making a lot of fun of them that, hey, you cannot have that. So they were very, very invested in this year. They put most of their arms and soldiers in that city. And it was a very convenient for us because we had this opportunity to destroy a lot of valuable Russian units in one place. And that's why, if we just withdraw, they will come to other city, they will destroy the other city. So we kept this city, which it was already destroyed completely. And we use this as a trap that they don't have way back, because we lost this city, nothing happens. It was destroyed already. There were no people living there, maybe some reckless people that decided not to evacuate. But for them, they did not have way back. They have to capture that. And they used a lot of resources. And from what I understand, it was a very good combination for our defense in terms of the defense positions, how many people we lose and how many people they lose daily. And it was like they were losing hundreds of people a day in this one city. I mean, dead. So like 200 people dead, 150. And there are lots of video. You can find lots of video on the internet where just the soldiers being shelled. They just running, like World War I type of attacks. There are lots of video where you can just calculate one attack and like 20 Russian soldiers dead. So this defensive line was important for us, just to give them as much damage as possible with as little resources as we can have. Of course, many Ukrainians also die there, and that's what happens. But I understand the command, they try to figure out what is the proper ratio, and in different locations, in different terrains, there are different ratio they can get from our side and from their side. And they kind of grab them, they grab their attention, and they made Russian commit to this city. And they just lost a lot of skilled soldiers and equipment. So that's what it is for us. And I think it's important because we did not use any of our new Western trained military units, which is probably like 100,000 people or so. It's like the best equipped, the best trained. We didn't throw any of them in the fight yet. And Russia already lost like most of their regular army, most of their Spetsnaz or special operation forces. So, that's the trade-off we are doing here. So we are exhausting them so we can have a bigger chance with the counteroffensive and so on. So that's, again, part of the bigger strategy.
Well, thank you so much. I think it's about time to wrap things up. Fred, it looked like you had maybe one more comment, or no, we're good.
Yes,
Okay.
no, we see you after the victory. The expression.
Sorry?
There's an expression like I typed in about saying goodbye for one Ukrainian to another Ukrainian. So we're as one American, as a group of Americans to you all, we will see you after the victory, and hopefully it's before the 24th.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for your support.
Thank you so much. We always learn so much on these calls. The local perspective is very, very valuable. And Maria, thank you for joining us. We
Thank you.
to hear your perspective as well today. So until next month, glory to Ukraine.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.